The rain came down in sheets, relentless and cold, turning the streets into dark mirrors that reflected the blur of neon signs and streetlights. Wind whipped against the windows of the small corner diner, rattling them with every gust. The place stood as a quiet refuge against the storm, its neon sign buzzing faintly, glowing like a beacon for anyone seeking warmth. Inside, the air was soft and welcoming, filled with the smell of fresh coffee, frying bacon, and the faint crackle of an old jukebox crooning out a tune from another decade. Only a handful of regulars occupied their usual spots, huddled over steaming mugs or plates of late-night food. To most, it was just another rainy evening in a sleepy town. To John, it was his ritual. John sat at the counter, fingers curled around a chipped white mug. His hands were rough and lined from years of hard work, the smell of grease and oil still clinging faintly to his clothes after another long shift at the garage. He was tired, his shoulders heavy with the day, but here, inside this quiet little diner, he could let the world slow down for a while. He was halfway lost in thought when the door opened with a jingle. A sudden gust of cold air swept in, carrying the pounding sound of rain. A woman stumbled inside. She was drenched, her coat dripping onto the linoleum floor, her hair plastered against her cheeks. For a moment she just stood there, shivering, scanning the room with wide eyes as though unsure she belonged. John noticed immediately. She was unlike anyone he had ever seen around town. Her coat was fine, tailored and expensive, and her boots gleamed even beneath the water droplets clinging to them. There was a kind of grace in her movements, but her expression betrayed something else: worry, unease, maybe even fear. She carried herself like a woman with the weight of the world pressing down on her. After a moment of hesitation, she chose a booth tucked in the corner and sat down, hugging herself for warmth. The waitress, a middle-aged woman who'd worked there long enough to know everyone by name, approached her table and handed her a menu. John tried to focus on his coffee, but he couldn't help stealing glances. He was curious. She didn't fit. She looked like someone who belonged in a city penthouse, not in a diner off a rain-slick highway in a quiet town. It didn't take long before his curiosity turned into concern. He overheard her voice, low and shaky, as she spoke to the waitress. I think I forgot my wallet," she said, her cheeks flushing crimson. "I'm so sorry. I didn't realize until now." Her hands fumbled nervously through her bag as though she might miraculously find it. The waitress gave her a small, reassuring smile, but John could see how embarrassed she was. Without thinking too much about it, John reached into his pocket. He pulled out a few crumpled bills, waved the waitress over, and slid them across the counter. "I've got it," he said simply. The waitress blinked in surprise. "You sure?" John nodded. "Yeah, it's no big deal." The woman's head snapped up, startled. "Oh, no, please," she said quickly. "You don't have to do that." "It's fine," John replied with a small smile. "Happens to everyone." For a long moment she hesitated, as though torn between pride and gratitude. Then her shoulders relaxed slightly. A shy smile broke through the embarrassment, softening her features in a way that caught John off guard. "Thank you," she whispered. "You didn't have to, but thank you." John shrugged and went back to his coffee, not wanting to make it into more than it was. Helping came naturally to him. He wasn't looking for attention. The woman ate quietly, her eyes flicking to him once or twice, as if still surprised by his gesture. When she finished, she stood and walked the counter. She pulled a napkin from the dispenser, scribbled something on it, and slid it toward him. "Thanks again," she said softly. "Here's my number. I'd like to repay you somehow." John glanced down at the napkin. A name, Natasha, and a phone number in neat handwriting. "That's not necessary," he said honestly. "It was just a meal." "Maybe," she replied, her smile tinged with something mysterious. "But it meant more than you know. Call me sometime." Before he could say anything else, she slipped out the door, the bell jingling softly as the storm swallowed her. John stared at the napkin in his hand, her name and number standing out starkly against the plain white paper. He smiled to himself, wondering who she really was, and why such a brief encounter felt strangely significant. Weeks passed. It began with a call, then a coffee date, then another. Soon, John and Natasha were meeting regularly. What started as a chance encounter on a rainy night grew into something neither expected. Natasha was warm, kind, and easy to talk to for reasons he couldn't explain. John found himself opening up to her in ways he rarely did with anyone. He told her about his work at the garage, about the long hours and the difficult customers, about the quiet dream he carried, owning his own repair shop one day. She listened intently, her eyes never straying, her encouragement steady. She shared parts of herself, too. She told him she worked in business, but her answers were vague whenever he pressed for details. John didn't mind. He liked her for who she was, not for what she did. And that was exactly why Natasha kept her biggest secret locked away. She wasn't just an ordinary woman who had forgotten her wallet that night. Natasha Clean was a billionaire CEO, the head of a company that made headlines across the country. To the world, she was polished, powerful, and untouchable. But with John, she was just Natasha, a woman who laughed freely, who listened, who felt seen. For years, she had lived behind walls built from wealth and reputation, never knowing who valued her for herself and who was drawn to the fortune attached to her name. With John, for the first time in a long time, she felt something real. But secrets have a way of surfacing. The discovery. One quiet afternoon, John decided to surprise Natasha. He stopped by her apartment with her favorite coffee in hand. The door was slightly ajar, and when he called her name, there was no immediate response. He stepped inside, expecting to find her in the kitchen or maybe working at her desk. Instead, what he saw made him freeze. The apartment was nothing like the simple life she had hinted at. It was massive, filled with luxurious furniture, priceless artwork, and shelves lined with books and awards. On the coffee table sat a glossy magazine. His eyes locked onto the cover. Natasha Clean, the billionaire CEO changing the game. Her face smiled back at him from the glossy page, polished and poised, a world away from the woman who'd shared greasy fries with him at the diner. John's heart pounded. His mind raced. Everything she had shared, everything he thought he knew, shifted. John. Her voice came from the hallway. She entered, stopped dead in her tracks when she saw him holding the magazine, his expression a storm of hurt and disbelief. "I can explain," she said softly. "Explain what?" John's voice was tight. "That you've been lying to me this whole time?" "I wasn't lying," Natasha said quickly. I didn't want my money to get in the way. I wanted you to see me. Just me." "You didn't trust me," John shot back. "You thought I'd care more about your money than about you." Her eyes filled with tears. "That's not it. I was scared. I didn't know how to tell you, without losing what we had." John shook his head, setting the magazine down with trembling hands. "I thought I knew you, Natasha, but now I'm not so sure." He walked out, leaving her standing in the middle of her apartment, tears streaming silently down her face. The days that followed were heavy for John. He replayed the scene in Natasha's apartment over and over in his mind. The glossy magazine cover, the grand room filled with wealth, the look on her face when he walked away. He told himself he had every right to feel betrayed. She had hidden a part of herself so enormous it reshaped everything he thought he knew about her. And yet, every time he tried to bury his anger, another truth kept rising to the surface. He missed her, terribly. The sound of her laugh, the way she encouraged him when he doubted himself, the warmth she carried into the dull corners of his life. All of it gnawed at him. One evening, after a long day at the garage, John returned to his small apartment. Bills lay scattered on the counter, reminders of the life he was still trying to piece together. But tucked among the envelopes was something that made him pause. A letter. His name was written across the front in Natasha's handwriting. With hesitant fingers, he opened it. Her words spilled out like confession. "John, I'm sorry. I never wanted to deceive you. My life has always been complicated, full of cameras, expectations, and people who see me for everything except who I truly am. That night at the diner, when you paid for my meal, it was the first time in years someone treated me like a person, not a headline. You saw me, not the billionaire, not the CEO. Just me. And I fell in love with that. With you. I was afraid to tell you the truth, because I didn't want to lose that feeling. I know I hurt you, but please believe me when I say my heart was never a lie. I love you, John. I only hope you can forgive me. John read it once, then again, and again. Each word softened the storm inside him, peeling away layers of anger to reveal something far more fragile: fear. Natasha hadn't hidden her identity out of malice. She had hidden it out of the same fear he carried. Fear of not being enough. The gala, a week later. John heard whispers around town about a charity gala Natasha was hosting. Normally, the thought of stepping into her world would have been laughable. He owned one suit, borrowed years ago from a friend, and had no idea how to navigate a room full of millionaires. But the letter lingered in his mind. Maybe it wasn't about being enough. Maybe it was about meeting her halfway. So he went. The grand hall glowed beneath crystal chandeliers, every inch designed to impress. Waiters in crisp uniforms glided between tables carrying silver trays, and laughter echoed to the cavernous space. John felt out of place instantly, his borrowed suit a poor match for the tuxedos and gowns around him. But he pushed forward, his eyes searching the crowd. And then he saw her. Natasha stood near the edge of the room, her gown shimmering under the lights. She looked breathtaking, but also heartbreakingly lonely. Her smile was practiced, polite, but her eyes drifted constantly toward the doors, as though waiting for someone who might never come. John took a breath and walked toward her. Natasha. His voice cut through the hum of conversation. She turned, startled, when her eyes landed on him. They widened with disbelief. "John," she whispered. He swallowed hard, his heart thundering in his chest. "I've been thinking. I was angry, yes, but I realized I wasn't fair to you either. You were scared just like me, and I let my pride get in the way." Her lips trembled. "You mean?" "I don't care about your money," John said firmly. "I care about you. The woman I met on a rainy night in a diner. The one who made me believe in something again." Tears welled in Natasha's eyes. She took a shaky step closer. "Do you mean that?" "Yes." His voice softened. "But this time, no secrets. I just want us to start fresh." The mask she had worn for so long cracked. Relief poured across her face as tears spilled down her cheeks. She reached for him, pulling him into a trembling embrace. "You were always enough for me," she whispered against his shoulder. "I was just too scared to believe it." New beginnings. Months passed, and slowly, life began to weave itself into something new. John's dream, one he had carried quietly for years, finally took shape. With grit, determination, and no shortage of sleepless nights, he opened his own garage. The grand opening wasn't flashy. There were no red carpets, no flashing cameras. Just friends, family, and curious locals gathered outside the modest building with its freshly painted sign. John's Auto Repair. It wasn't big. It wasn't perfect. But it was his. A space where he could work with his hands, build something lasting, and finally breathe knowing he had taken control of his future. Natasha stood proudly by his side, her face glowing with happiness. She had supported him at every step. Not by throwing money at the dream, but by quietly easing the path when she could, nudging him forward when doubts crept in, and reminding him every day that she believed in him. John had insisted on doing the work himself, not wanting his success to be shadowed by her wealth. Natasha respected that. She only stepped in when absolutely necessary, always careful to let the victory feel fully his. When the ribbon was cut and the small crowd cheered, John glanced at her. She was clapping, her eyes shining, and in that moment, he understood something deeper than words. Her love hadn't been about what she could give him. It was about what they could build together. Inside the garage, the air smelled of fresh paint and new beginnings. Tools gleamed in their places, and the floor shone from hours of cleaning. John gave his guests a small tour, pride in every word. Natasha trailed at his side, quietly smiling, her hand brushing against his now and then as if to anchor herself to the moment. When the crowd thinned and the sun began to sink low, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, John stood in the doorway of his garage and looked at her. "We did it," he said softly. Natasha squeezed his hand. "No," she corrected gently. "You did it. I just stood beside the man I believe in." John smiled, pulling her closer. And in that instant, as the last light of day spilled over them, he knew something with absolute certainty. The rain had brought them together. The secrets had tested them. But love, the raw, imperfect, honest kind, had made them stronger. Whatever storms lay ahead, they would face them side by side, together,